Stories shape lives. They shape our world, they shape our thoughts, and thus inform our choices and our actions. For me as a storyteller, 10 years telling other people's stories, I've been directly affected by the stories I've shared and told and filmed. And before that, I worked in TV news for 5 years and really got to learn the power of a story and kind of trying to understand how that influences the wider world. Especially in local news, which is where I was working, you could really see that the stories we were sharing were helping to, erode society. They were kind of feeding into this isolation narrative that is continuing, which is why people feel so scared to come out and they get locked in their own little rooms, especially the older people. Not so much in London, but in the rural areas, people feel scared to go out, and I would suggest that they feel scared to go out because of the narratives that they have. And the narratives that they have aren't direct experience, but they're learnt narratives through the media. Brexit is a great example of this. If you read a newspaper, you are more likely to vote to leave, and if you don't read a newspaper, you're more likely to vote remain. So when I quit my job in ITV, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I felt very lost. Very lost in myself, in my life. I didn't really have a direction. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. When I looked out in the world, when I saw the issues that we faced, when I looked on YouTube, when I could see protesters getting beaten up, people getting killed, Palestinians being murdered, houses being smashed up, where I could see environmental degradation, where I could see politicians lying, where I could see military interventions that was only causing more damage and potentially breeding more terrorists to create more acts, which then in turn breeds more military intervention. And something I felt had to change. And if news and stories and what we share with one another is part of that, then that's the bit that I could influence, and that's the bit that I could help change. I very serendipitously got into filmmaking through some very weird synchronistic kind of things. Like the first thing is my parents moving to a village, and we bought the corner shop, and in the village of my parents' corner shop was my dentist, who owned an outside broadcast truck, so I managed to get work experience with him. Through him I managed to get some work experience at Salisbury University, and then I was granted a place, not having the qualifications. And then in the first year I managed to get some work experience at the BBC, mainly because the head of news from the BBC lived in my parents' village. And then next door to him, someone who just moved in, was the head of news for ITV. He came into my parents' shop one day, ITV t-shirt on. My dad asked him for a card. I ended up sending my CV in for what I thought was work experience. I go for an interview. 3 days later, get a phone call from HR offering me a job. I'm like, what job? Anyway, I ended up taking that job. It was clearly like the best job I was going to kind of get after having left university. But after 3-4 years, I could really feel like my creative juices weren't really being fed anymore, and I'd kind of reached the limit. I was out every day shooting the news, driving a satellite truck and gathering the stories, and really began to reflect on some of these stories. And there was actually a few times when my morals were really deeply challenged, filming people I didn't feel we had the right to film. And that's not just because they didn't want to be filmed. I'd filmed people that didn't want to be filmed before, but mainly criminals and people coming out of law courts that had done things wrong. But this time I was actually asked to go and stand outside Basingstoke's Coroner's Court to film a grieving mother. Now, the boy of the mother was guilty. He had killed someone in a drink driving accident, and that is tragic, and we probably should be sharing the stories around that to encourage road safety. But this poor mother has not only lost a boy to the prison system, and in a tragedy, like, is he ever going to be the same person again? And really, what value does a grieving mother have on that situation? And there was a few other times where I just felt completely, deeply, morally questioning myself. in telling and gathering the stories that I was. But in an overarching way, I just felt like the stories we share with one another have a great impact on our lives. And like I said, those inform our choices and our actions, and then that breeds into the wider narrative of the world. So I set about to tell a different kind of story. I didn't know like what those stories were going to be. I found people I knew, found people I just liked their energy, I liked what they were doing, and I wanted to like help and be part of what they did. So to start with, I found organisations that I thought needed help, and I made them promotional films, event films, and ended up being part of the group. I didn't intend to become part of their group. I just wanted to help make their films. But from the Kindness Offensive, who working with them was why I was awarded a place on the Independent's Happy List in making Britain a happier place. If you don't know the Independent's Happy List, it's the Times. It's opposite to the Times Rich List. So the Times do a rich list, 100 richest people in the UK or the world, I think. And so the Independent do the opposite of that, which is the Happy List. And I was really thankful to be awarded a place. So I work with the Kindness Offensive. They're the world's largest performers of random acts of kindness. And for like 4 or 5 years, I was deeply embedded with them. Ended up living in Camden, rent-free, in an old pub that we flipped into a bookshop for like 2 years, 3 years, I think I was there. And such an amazing time, just every day waking up and working with like-minded people committed to just wanting to make the world a better place. I also work with the Museum of Happiness, the world's first museum dedicated to the science and art of happiness. Again, just a bunch of people working ridiculously hard to make the world a better place and not putting a big price tag on it. Both the Museum of Happiness and the Kindness Offensive have a big ethos of being open to as many people as they can. The Kindness Offensive being everything is free to the end user, and the Museum of Happiness has a really big kind of community end part of their project where they don't charge people money. But here I am just helping these organisations and telling their stories, but in turn they're affecting me, and listening to these stories and listening to what these people have done was inspiring to me. And there's something else about being a storyteller that you begin to see, because obviously I film, let's say I film 20 to 1, so I film 2 hours, and from 2 hours I make 1 minute, or it's that sort of ratio. I might film for a couple of hours and I'll get a couple of minutes. That's the kind of ratio the documentary filmmakers work with. So I get to see a lot more than what gets put out. And same with the journalists. They're obviously gathering lots of information and lots of questions, and then only presenting so much of the information. And so when you look at all this information and when you study people, which is effectively what I've done by meeting people and asking them what they do and why they do it, hundreds of people now I've asked that question to, I begin to see patterns. And ultimately what I've come to learn is that we have far more in common with everyone, even people that we might consider to be our gravest enemies, the people that we disagree with the most. We have far more in common with them than what we have that separates us. And so the tagline on my kind of website is to highlight the unity in our seemingly separate world. But these stories and these films have had a great influence on my life. Many of the people that I filmed are now my friends, if not family, because they are now a part of my life. I've had emails where people have requested help, whereby a couple from Devon that built a roundhouse illegally on their own land, but they didn't have planning permission. And this lady sent me the most beautiful email, just appealing for help. She just felt so unheard by the system that something needed to be done. And subsequently, after I told her story, mainstream papers picked it up, and even ITV's This Morning went live from their house down in Devon. And I was also giving them media training throughout as well, because I know how the media can be quite a ferocious beast, and if you don't stick to your guns, or if you say something that's a little bit edgy, then they're going to pick up on that just to discredit everything that you've possibly said. But these people are now enriched because I've helped tell their story, which has really helped to teach and help show me that listening is probably my superpower. When I start my camera, I focus it, I compose it. If I put it on a tripod, I even balance the head. And then I expose an image, I expose people, and they present themselves to me, and then I edit that, and then I present that to the world. They are truly vulnerable in my hands. And I don't take that lightly. I take that with great reverence. I have great respect for the fact that these people share with me everything that they have, and then I present that delicately to the world. And many of the people that I filmed come back, and I bring people to tears. In fact, it's something I'm getting quite used to, actually, is making people cry. But I'm making people cry in a good way. And I think like this event here is all about triggering conversations. Well, to me, filmmaking is a conversation. It's quite a drawn out conversation, you know. I think about something, I go and find a subject, I ask them lots of questions, we have a conversation and we film that, I then edit that, and then I put that out, and then that in turn then sparks a conversation online, and you know, it's like a fractal, that information and those conversations then go out and everyone can have a discussion about that, and everyone can be influenced by that. And that is the change to me. That's how we change the world, is by changing the conversation. And if there is one thing I would suggest that people do, is to spend more time listening. The Dalai Lama said that when we're talking, we're not learning, but when we're listening to other people, we're invited to learn about what it is they have learned. And everyone has something to teach. Everyone has a story, and everyone wants to be heard and wants to be felt like they are listened to by people that care. So thank you very much for listening.